The one just before this, I was talking about how, with Your Sister's Sister, that was the third of the three movies that Blunt had come out in 2012, which was such a busy year for her, and then I totally forgot. This was also 2012. It came out just before the 5-year engagement, I believe. So, yeah, it just stretches that out even more. And obviously, the thing that stands out immediately with this one, of course, is the title. It almost kind of made the movie a punchline at the time that it came out, unfortunately, and sort of makes it sound maybe not so riveting. But you do have not only the two of them with an incredible chemistry and Kristen Scott Thomas doing her own thing. There's also the fact that Lasse Hallström directed this, who did, What's Eating Gilbert Grape and The Cider House Rules and Hachi, among many other things that you have undoubtedly seen, and who just has his own sort of style anyway. And it brings us this like surprisingly feel-good movie in a way that you may not be expecting, especially from maybe the title or whatever. So when we meet these two characters, which is pretty much immediately the opening scenes, we see that the very first thing that's happening is she's contacting him by email. So there's already a connection there immediately, despite the fact that had this scene not been the first scene, they would seem like probably on almost two different planets, because we've got Harriet, who is Blonde's character, she seems all business and is very much about being able to get things done, but then when we see her immediately after this with her boyfriend, and she's like making out with him in their apartment, and she's basically saying that this isn't really the kind of person that she is, and she's actually like really shy and quiet and all that. And while I did say that they seem like maybe they're on different planets, McGregor's character is not all that different in that sense. But he is very much like, he would seem like somebody who's a bit almost too uptight, on the surface at first. Where he's the one that's basically saying, oh, this is, a terrible idea, it's, completely illogical, there's no way we can do this. Despite the fact that she seems very confident in it, even if it's more so from a business standpoint than anything else, there's still definitely a confidence she has that he does not. And there's the whole thing of I can't remember off the top of my head. Asperger's is brought up. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's implied that he actually has it, or if it was just being thrown at him as an insult. Either one is equally believable. Of course, these two are eventually going to come together for this project that this sheik is involved in with, of course, bringing Sam fishing to the Yemen, because of course he does. And naturally he sees fly fishing as just not this sort of, pastime of his, and he has this great admiration for McGregor's character from the start because of the fishing flies that he has made. But there's also the whole thing about how fishing basically symbolizes like harmony and faith, and there's the whole idea of like the benefits of this area that this area could have, just having agriculture in this desert land, more or less. So it's going to be this huge, big, daunting task, and you have these two people who are pretty much butting heads immediately, mainly from the standpoint of McGregor's just basically trying to find anything and everything to make sure everybody knows that this project is a bad idea that's going to go nowhere. So we have this first interaction, which is obviously, predictably, their views are not going to align here, but they're able to do that in a sort of funny and charming way, where it's this way that she contradicts pretty much everything that he says. And like even when he says, like, I assume you're going to tell me that it's not even hot in the Yemen, and she immediately comes up with with the statistics, in the mountainous areas the temperatures get down to here, and eventually it does get to a point where it feels a bit like this was marketed as a romantic comedy, and in setup you can clearly see where that's coming from, especially that this scene ends with her walking away laughing hysterically because McGregor has run into a window, and which is a really interestingly well acted scene from her, because we know Blunt has a very distinct laugh, a very recognizable laugh, and the one in this scene is not it. So it's this sort of interesting scene where you can tell it still feels natural, even though we can tell that it's a bit acted. But this is just sort of the starting grounds for where they're eventually going to end up, because of course, conveniently enough, she's in a relationship with this dude and he has a wife. But naturally things are going to happen. Her boyfriend's going to get sent off to Afghanistan. His wife's going to go to Geneva for a job. And so they're going to be together away from their partners and doing this project. So you kind of get where this is going, but it's not really the kind of movie that sounds like it's setting up, which is what makes it kind of nice and unique about it. Because obviously, I say that, but obviously eventually there is going to be a connection, of course. But the great thing about it is the way that they build it up, because it's not quite instantaneous, but it does feel rather quick, but not too quick. Like it's all about the way they build it up. Like when they're talking to his boss after they've just had a meeting and they've gotten the whole, like, how much salmon is going to be transferred and all that. So they're talking about the Three Gorges Dam, and the boss says, you mean the one in China? And they both respond to this at the same time, pretty much saying a variation of the same thing, and they catch themselves doing it, and they kind of have this look to each other. And it's stuff like that, where it's like, there's going to be those small connections there, but not like the big grand gestures that you would expect. That's usually a cliche in something like this. It builds in like those small ways. Eventually it does get to like what would be considered probably a grand gesture eventually is when we get to the point where her boyfriend is missing in action and she's extremely bent out of shape about it. So he brings her a sandwich. But it's only revealed that he's doing this after he's gotten this verbal beatdown, because the uncertainty has just broken her so much, and she feels like, much like us as an audience when we saw him in this first couple of scenes, we just kind of took him at surface level, and we don't really realize how much of like this really caring person he is, and he's really just, especially with this marriage that he's basically might as well be over at this point. It's like he's just kind of looking for somebody to love. And he seems to have found this with her, though it's just this small gesture of, I made you a sandwich because you were upset. And there's just something there's almost like an innocence to the way this is building, that just makes it feel so much more potent, especially when you compare it to other movies that would handle this material in a much different, more reckless way. And also the way she reacts to this, especially learning about her boyfriend. There's definitely a humanity that's really shines through here, especially that Blund is able to show off in a really effective way. Because it's like, up to this point, we've only seen like she's all business, but there's also, I mean, like, meeting with the businessmen, speaking Mandarin and all that. But there's also, like, we've just been seeing her, like, smiling and giggling most of the time, too. So there's, like, this massive contrast when she gets this news, and it just completely breaks her, and she's stuck in this web of uncertainty that she can't get out of. And it's just really tearing her apart. And they're both, like, the only stable thing that they have now, and working on this project together is, like, the one thing that each of them has at this point. But the thing about that makes this so interesting is the breakdown that she goes through, because it's revealed that she's only known this dude for like 3 weeks prior to this. So when you see this, it's kind of like, and she actually goes through, like, when she's telling us this, she says, like, I can barely remember what he looks like, and it's like there's this confusing pain that she has that even she can't quite figure out, and it's like, why is she, I mean, obviously, it's a tragic thing regardless, because it was somebody that she met and had found a connection with, even if it was only for 3 weeks. But her breakdown is as if they were in a marriage for years. It's so extreme. And the thing about this is that there's an example following this that shows that the movie isn't gonna, like, wallow in sadness, despite how much there is in it. Because there's one line after this has happened when she finally it seems to be explained more or less in one line why she's had such an extreme reaction to the fact that this guy could be dead that she only knew for 3 weeks. And she said, I'm probably paraphrasing here, but basically it comes down to, I just wanted to know him. And that's, like, devastating. But the movie does not play it that way at all. It's like, it knows what it is, what the feelings are, and it gives us time to feel them. And very much through Blunt we feel them, and through her performance, but and especially in scenes when they don't even show us everything, like when McGregor's just listening to her weep through a closed door, but when she's on the other side of the door and we can see her, it's much more downplayed. And then it's able to sort of, not necessarily move on, but go on to the next thing, like I said, without wallowing in the sadness like it could have, and really try to go for the heartstrings thing. Because the character has like this real sympathetic desperation, where it's like, it's heartbreaking because of how internalized it is, and how downplayed she's playing it. Where the same where she's on the phone, and when she comes back she says, I was just leaving him a voicemail, even though I know he doesn't have his phone with him, and he's probably dead. And it's just like, just little things like that that don't overblow it, are enough to be devastating without having to be big, and that's where a lot of the movie's emotion comes from, and that plays a huge part in making a movie like this work, and making it feel like it's something different. And because obviously, you know, it is going to reach the inevitable where, like, his wife comes back, and she learns of Harriet, and she jumps to conclusions. But the thing is like, we've gotten to know there feels like such an innocence between her and Alfred's relationship, that it's like, when his wife is saying this to him, it's like, even we as an audience almost feel like deeply offended that she would talk about their relationship that way, and assume that that's what it is. Now, of course, it does turn out that he is falling for her, naturally. I mean, who wouldn't? But the thing here also is, like, once he realizes he's in love with her and he reveals that to her, it's, like, so bizarre and so jarring to see a movie deal with that logically. Because obviously this is where the obvious conflict would be. And it's like, it seems like it'd be a lose-lose, because typically a movie would make one of two decisions. Either she would jump at the chance at him immediately, and it's like, whoa, what happened to Afghanistan, dude? Are you not upset about that? Or it could be she, like, completely throws a tantrum and says, like, are you crazy? I'm going through Afghanistan, guy. But she, like, fully accepts his love and says, I need time. And it's like, for God's sake, if all romance movies did that, they'd probably be significantly less frustrating. And it's like, just that real mature approach it takes to this. And like I said, just using logic, it just feels so, like, weirdly unseen in movies like this. And it feels so refreshing at the same time. And then, of course, that also gets us to the way he also sees it realistically as well, where he basically compares his chances with her as to the possibility of a mission to Mars. And that's brings us to, like, the shockingly smooth title drop when Blunt actually, it's one of those cases where Blunt actually says the title of the movie in dialogue. And it's like, with a title like this, that's, like I said, practically a walking punchline. It's like the fact that they're able to unironically get that title in, because it would almost seem like it would have to be a joke, like Craig Robinson saying Hot Tub Time Machine. But the fact that in the context, it's like it's this symbol for this whole going after the impossible thing. And it's like, it's amazing how much sense it makes in context, and how it's not just what it would mean on the surface, and now it's not just literally that. Is just really, that's crazy that they could pull that off, but they really did. And then eventually we do get, obviously there's going to have to be a conflict, especially being a romance movie, but it's like, the conflict just feels so, like, well and carefully developed, to where when it gets to the point that it does, it seems inevitable, but it also, just the way it's dealt with in a really real way, where it's like, especially with the way they deal with how bittersweet it is, because it's like it's good for her that the boyfriend does return, and it's like it feels good to see Harriet be able to put her heart back together after we saw how broken she was when he was potentially dead. But then there's also like our heart breaks for Alfred, and not just because she's going that direction, but also that this is about the time that Kristen Scott Thomas is using this reunion to blatantly overshadow the project and all the progress they've made and all the work they've done, and how they're so close to getting there, like with every new development. And it just really reaches a big down point. But like I said, but there's such a bittersweet quality, because it's to the point to where we want to see both characters happy, but we've also come to terms with the fact that knowing what's broken Harriet's heart, this is potentially what's going to put it back together. So we've really got, like, usually in movies like this, we're just watching the characters conflict with their emotions, but as an audience, we get to do it with them for once. And we also sort of have that feel of, it feels like win-win and lose-lose. Like somebody's gonna get their heart broken that doesn't deserve it, but also somebody that we really want to see happy is going to be. But and there's just a middle ground there, and it's like it really feels like a conflict that's just really earned, and really, like, it's also something that actually, this isn't the type of movie you kind of expect to desperately want to know the next thing that's going to happen or the next decision that's going to be made. But yeah, once the decision is made, it does feel like in another movie it would feel a bit sleazy, like, oh, after all that, you're just gonna dump that for this. But I mean, it feels like a logical decision once it's made. And really either one would have, honestly. Obviously, Alfred was maybe not taking it as lightly as the other guy, but the one line gets me every time when he's like, "I'm sorry, I'm not dead in a ditch," and McGregor says, "I'm not sure I can accept your apology." And it's like dialogue like that is so good, and also kind of adds sort of almost like a dark comedy aspect to it, just in dialogue anyway, not necessarily what takes place. And so, yeah, that's the whole love story aspect, which to me is like the absolute core of it. You've got the whole, salmon fishing and the Yemen thing going on, but really the heart and the core of the movie is this romance. But it's also told through like these really serene shots where it's like these images that are just sort of bursting out, and it's like it sort of like kills any doubts you might have about the movie being dull that you might have going into it just by the way it looks. You've also got great stuff like the intentional shot of, there's a shot of McGregor on the street and there's people walking and everybody's walking one direction and he's walking the other, and it's like, because salmon swim against the current, it's stuff like that is used really nicely. It also surprisingly uses split screen really well too in a couple of scenes, mostly involving phone calls, where like there was a moment when they were talking to Kristen Scott Thomas and it's like, through the split screen as it comes in, it's like she just walks into the frame and like inserts herself into the scene, which is great. Or the scene when he's leaving a message on Harriet's machine, and it's like and we're getting it at the same time. We get to see exactly how she's taking what he's saying, and maybe it's a bit of, she's maybe taking it the wrong way or whatever, but we get to see it from both sides. And the way like the sound mixes too, where it's on his side we can just hear his voice talking, and on her side we can hear it like it's sort of mechanical through the machine but happening simultaneously. Just little techniques like that really make a difference too. And then of course I've mentioned Kristen Scott Thomas a couple of times. A lot of people at the time say that she's like the standout and she's like the main reason to see the movie. I really love the love story, and I really love the chemistry between the two of them. Especially Blonde's performance and just that real emotion she's able to bring to it. But I do get why people love the Kristen Scott Thomas character for sure. But it does, like, especially like the "I'm your fucking mother" scene and stuff like that, the big scenes. But and she's so great and so fun to watch and everything. But it does seem like she's in like an entirely different movie. And I get it if a lot of people would rather see that movie than the romance movie, but I don't know, and I would watch that. Like, she could be the main character of a great separate movie for sure. But I just really love the way that they just made all the right decisions in making this really, like I said, feel good romance movie. It is like, obviously it is very much a feel good movie. That's a big one of the big losing my wording. One of the big assets of the movie, but there's also, and it is, yeah, I know. There are a couple of things I didn't mention, like, yeah, it's a great feel-good movie. It's probably one of the only feel-good movies that also has an assassination attempt in it. It does go in that direction a couple of times when the guys are kind of coming down the streak a little bit, but still. And yeah, also on that, I heard that some complaints were like genre confusion. Like how I said, it was pretty much advertised as a romantic comedy. You've got McGregor walking into windows and shit, but I do think that's a problem because a lot of people go in pretty much expecting a comedy, and there's some biting dialogue in there, and there's some situations like that. But I've never really seen it as a comedy, despite the fact that it's generally put in that category. I do think it's more or less a romantic drama that just happens to have this other stuff going on and happens to have funny dialogue in it or funny moments in it. I think the also confusion comes from the fact that the entire like first half hour or so is like so upbeat. Like the way that it's upbeat sort of has the feel of a comedy. But I've never really classified it as that or really seen it much as that. So that's the way I see it anyway. But so yeah, and on top of that, even with the title, what it is, it did surprisingly pretty decent at the box office, which is kind of worth noting for a movie like this. But so yeah, so I'm obviously like a really big fan of this. Particularly, it's like I said, it's one of like the go-to romance movies for me, just because it goes in all those directions that it seems like other movies avoid just to make it easier and more cliche. And it's like this movie doesn't take those easy ways out and actually gives Harriet a very difficult decision to make. That we can absolutely sympathize with her through the whole thing. I can't think of a decision she makes where it's like you kind of turn on her, because that's almost always happens in romance movies. But you always stick with her and always feel sympathetic, because we don't, much like her, we don't really get to feel Afghanistan guy very much, because obviously she's only known him for 3 weeks and he's been gone this whole time, presumably dead. But we've really gotten to know Alfred and how great of a person he really is underneath his sort of no bullshit exterior. But yeah, and that seems like it would be like the decision she makes is the obvious choice, the cliche choice, but I really do like the developments that led up to that and what we felt along the way, which is the most important thing. So yeah, so that's what this is. The next one is, once again, I'm not sure. Maybe the animated one is somewhere in here. So we'll just go on. We'll just see what's next. We'll let it happen. So until then, that's it.